Who do you turn to when you want to know what to do? David had some options. And in this session and the next session, we're going to be talking about those. Do you go to your friends? Do you go to those who might be your enemies? Or do you even consult yourself? I mean, after all, we've got lots of good ideas. Well, today we're going to look at David's first option. David wanted to bring the ark back to Jerusalem. Now, that was a wonderful idea. He wanted to bring it back because it would be a central location for worship. It would be a way to solidify the kingdom. And so he asked for directions. No, he didn't ask God. He asked somebody else. 1 Chronicles 13, 1 through 4, it says, David consulted with the captains of thousands and hundreds and every leader. He's got a lot of advisors there. David said to all the assembly of Israel, come, if it seems good to you, and if it is of the Lord our God, let us bring the ark of our God back to us, for we have not inquired of it since the days of Saul. Then all of the assembly said they would, for the thing seemed right in the eyes of the people. Not in the eyes of God, but in the eyes of people. Now, it was a good idea. It was great. So David gathered together 3,000 choice men of Israel. He probably got this many people together because it was the best of his army. These weren't necessarily his advisors or leaders, but these were his strong warriors. Doing that was probably because the Philistines might hear that the Israelites were moving the ark again. Now, why should they care about that? Way back in the days of the prophet Eli, even before the days of Samuel, before the day of King Saul, and even before David was born, the Philistines and the Israelites went to war again. And Israel lost this battle. They thought, how could we do this? So they go to the priest. And in 1 Samuel chapter 4, verse 3, it says, when the people had come into camp, the elders of Israel said, why has the Lord defeated us today before the Philistines? They had an idea. Let us bring the ark of the covenant of the Lord from Shiloh to us, that when it comes to us, it may save us from the hands of our enemies. The Israelites did that. But bringing the ark of the covenant into the place of battle was not God's plan. And that day, the Israelites lost three things. They lost the two sons of Eli, the priest, who carried the ark. They lost the battle. But most importantly, they lost the ark of God. And there it was in the hands of the Philistines. Well, it didn't take those Philistines to realize that what had been a blessing to Israel was a curse to them. And they wanted to get rid of that as soon as they could. So they returned it to Israel. And Israel had it for a while, but then they took it to the house of Abinadab on the hill. Might wonder why that. Why was that so specific? Well, this was about 20 years earlier. And so David decides that he and the men now are going to go and get the ark. And they set the ark of God on a new cart and brought it out of the house of Abinadab on a hill where it had been for those 20 years. And Uzzah and Ahio, sons of Abinadab, drove the new cart. Ooh, right away we've got a problem. Putting that cart on a cart. God had commanded that the ark be carried by the Levites. The new cart idea originated with the Philistines. It came from their group plan. See, in 1 Samuel 6, 7, and 8, it says, make a new cart and take 2 milk cows which have never been yoked and hitch the cows to the cart and take their cows home away from them. Then take the ark of the Lord and set it on the cart. That's it. I mean, if a new cart can work for the Philistines, why can't it work for the Israelites? Sounds like a great idea. So the Israelites decided to use it. But remember, that was not God's plan. God had said it's supposed to be carried. And so David is carrying the ark. David and all the house of Israel, they're playing music before the Lord on all kinds of instruments. And when they came to Nashon's threshing floor, Uzzah stuck out his hand to the ark of the God and took hold of it, for the oxen stumbled. Bringing back to Jerusalem the cart with the ark on it sounded great. I mean, after all, they were bringing the ark in for a good and godly reason. They wanted God to be glorified. They wanted people to be able to worship him. And not only that, they're right in the middle of a worship service. It said that all the people are singing and the instruments are playing. And then those oxen unexpectedly, suddenly stumble. Imagine. You're driving that cart. You see the oxen stumble. And you look over your shoulder and you see the ark sort of tilt. What are you going to do? What's your first impulse? Reach out and stop it. I mean, anytime we see somebody about to fall and we're close enough to help, we're going to do it. And, after all, God certainly needed Uzzah's help. If his ark was going to fall, let him stop it. That was not God's plan. It said in verse 7, it said, then the anger of the Lord was aroused against Uzzah, and God struck him there for his error, and he died there by the ark of God. He died just for helping out. He died for just acting on impulse. The death of Uzzah for what was seemingly a very minor event put the fear of God in everyone. And that's exactly what God intended to happen. Transporting the ark in the wrong manner showed ignorance or disobedience to the law, and certainly disrespect for God. Now, Uzzah, he was a Levite. He was aware of the law. He knew what God's word said. And he'd probably also heard about the Philistines. He knew why the ark of God was in his father's house. He knew what had happened when the Philistines took the ark when they weren't supposed to, and how that they all became sick. He knew what had happened when they delivered it to one town and people dared to look inside of the ark and they all died. He was aware of all of that. So it was not ignorance that caused him to do that. And not only that, he knew what the law said. And the law strictly prohibited any Israelite except the priest to have contact with the ark. And there was a very specific penalty for anyone who was a Levite, like Uzzah, who touched it. Numbers says, when Aaron and his sons have finished covering the sanctuary and all the furnishings of the sanctuary, which includes the ark, then the camp is set to go. Then the sons of Kohath, who are Levites, shall come and carry them, and they shall not touch anything lest they die. That was the penalty of it. Death was what was to happen to anything to anyone who touched God's ark. Uzzah knew God's command, and he knew his nature before he died because he touched the ark. His error was disobedience based on an inadequate view of God's holiness. We do serve a holy God. The ark itself identified the presence of God, not just to the people of Israel, but to all the nations around it. And just as God is a holy God, and he was to be treated with reverence and respect, so was the ark, which represented his character, his presence. And the Israelites had to learn reverence and fear of the Lord. They had gotten sort of slack in their worship. They had gotten so that he was no longer the holy, holy God, someone to be revered. It's sort of like today we hear expressions like the man upstairs, the big guy. And we just casually go into our worship services, forgetting that today, in this century, we still serve a holy God. Everything around us may have gone casual, but not God. He is still holy, and he is still God. Now, as we look at this and we reread the text, there's no indication here that Uzzah's eternal salvation was impacted. Even when he disobeyed and he died, he still loved God. And yeah, I believe when we get to heaven, after we all die, that we're going to see Uzzah there. And there are a lot of people doing God's will, doing it the wrong way, who die, and maybe this is part of the answer. They're doing God's will, but they're doing it the wrong way, not having respect, not asking God, how do you want me to do it? What do you want me to do? Uzzah found that out the hard way. David, who was leading the procession, also saw it. And what was David's response? First of all, 2 Samuel 6:8 says, and David became angry because of the Lord's outbreak against Uzzah. Now, who was David angry with? Was he angry with all the captains who had told him how to do it? Was he angry with all the people because they said, well, this seems good in our eyes? Was he angry at Abinadab for letting the ark leave? Was he angry at Uzzah for touching the ark and dying? Was he angry at himself? No. David was angry at God. Yeah. He's like us. He's a man after God's own heart, but have you ever been angry at God? And I'm sure the question that came out in this anger was, why? Why did you allow this to happen? You could have stopped it. Uzzah did not have to die. You did not have to kill him. He could still be alive. He had a lot of years left. He could serve you. He could be doing good things for you, and you let him die. Those are some of the emotions that probably run through us when we don't get what we think we should get, or when we realize that God really is not fair. He's just. He's holy, but he is not fair. And we don't like that. We think we should have our rights. But God is more concerned about his righteousness than he is about our rights. And God did not zap David because he got mad at him. God knew what was in his heart. He knew that anger. And when you speak out to God, God already knows the thoughts and intents of your heart. And God saw David angry at him, but then he also saw him immediately have another emotion. Verses 9 and 10, David was afraid of the Lord that day and said, "Who can take the ark of the Lord? How can the ark of the Lord come to me?" So David would not move the ark of the Lord with him to the city of David, but David took it aside into the house of Obed-Edom. A man after God's own heart, but fully human. And in just a few moments, a very few minutes at the most, David went from the highest joy and elation, praising God, to anger at God, to being afraid of him. This tragedy of Uzzah brought back the necessary fear of the Lord into the heart of David. There were many reasons that David had to be afraid of God at that moment. He didn't understand what was happening. And a lot of times that causes fear as much as holy reverence. David thought, maybe the ark's been there for 20 years and it should have just stayed there and never should have been moved. Or, God punished Uzzah. Maybe that was the starting point on me and all the people. We might die too. Or, suppose I carry the ark on into town and the oxen stumble again. What else could happen on this trip? Or maybe if I bring the ark there into the city of David, trouble will come to the city of David, to my city, to my home, to my house, the same way it did right here, the same way it did to the Philistines, the same way it happened. So David stopped everything. He left the ark at the nearest home. He left it there and resolved to wait for direction. Can you imagine what would have happened if, instead of waiting for direction right now, when David got the idea of moving the ark, he had gone to God? Inquiring of the Lord was a habit that David had. He did that when he was running from Saul. He did that when he became king. He did that when he was fighting the Philistines. But now he's got a great idea and all these people. Who needs God? David. If David had inquired of God to start with, all of this never would have happened. So now David has to learn how to do God's work, God's way. And he's there at home, and chapter 6, verses 11 through 12 of 2 Samuel tells us that the ark of the Lord remained in the house of Obed-Edom for 3 months. And the Lord blessed the house of Obed-Edom. And it was told to King David, "The Lord has blessed the house of Obed-Edom and all that belongs to him because of the ark of God." The blessings of God rest wherever the presence of God is. So if you want to be blessed, find out where God is. Go into his presence and his blessings will be there. David is not dumb. He's a smart guy. And he realized that, and so he decided again, I'm going to go get the ark. But first of all, he had to make things right. He had 2 mistakes that he had to rectify. So he called the priest and he called the Levi. 1 Chronicles 15, 11 through 13, let us know this. He tells them, sanctify yourself that you may bring up the ark of the Lord God of Israel to the place I have prepared for it. For because you did not do it the first time, the Lord our God broke out against us, and we did not consult him about the proper order. This was not a group decision. David was not going to anyone else for advice. He admitted his mistake. He said, for because. He wants them to understand there is no doubt this is the reason, and this is the only reason this happened. It wasn't about Uzzah. It wasn't about the oxen. It wasn't about anything. What the reason was that you as the priest did not do it the way it should be done. And we did not ask God his advice. We did it by the wrong method only because we did not ask God. We did not consult him for what he wanted us to do. How often does that happen with us? We look about and see our mistakes and we think, what did I do wrong? Generally, it's because we ask the wrong persons, even ourselves, for directions. David said, no, it happened because I didn't ask God. And he said, I've done that now. And in 2 Samuel 6:13 through 15, when those bearing the ark, see, they're going through, and now they're carrying their ark on their shoulder. They've got poles extended, and that ark is being carried by the Levites the way it should be. Those are carrying the ark. And says when they'd gone 6 paces, that he sacrificed oxen and fatted sheep. Some people think that he did it every 6 paces. Some people think he did it as a test to say, Lord, is this offering acceptable? And if it's acceptable, if you accept this, I know that I'm in your will. And he didn't want to make another mistake. And it goes on to say, then David danced before the Lord with all his might. And David was wearing a linen ephod. So David and all the house of Israel brought up the ark of the Lord with shouting and with the sound of trumpets. David made sure this time that all of God's instructions were followed. He exchanged his priestly robe, his kingly robe, for a priestly robe. He said, I'm going to be humble. I'm going to be submissive. He said, I'm not coming to God as look at who I am. He said, but I'm coming as a worshiper before you. And he danced as a public demonstration of his joy in the Lord and of his submission to him. David learned that following God was not a group decision. It was a heart decision. And that's what you need to learn. That's what I need to learn. If I'm going to follow God, I have to do it his way and not listen to all the voices around me.